I'm on Highway 72, about 40 miles outside of Memphis. I'm headed west. I'm on my way to Texas. Actually, I've got a fundraising trip through Texas and Oklahoma over the next 5 days. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. In today's episode, I'm trying to slip in between some storms. I was planning to leave about 4 o'clock this evening. It is just a little bit before 11 a.m. Central Time. But I knew some storms were coming in. In fact, we're going to close the campus about 12:01 today. And when I was doing some research last night and early this morning, I realized that there was kind of a window that if I could get on the road early, I would kind of slide in between some storms. And some of the storms that were going to be roughest on areas like Corinth, Mississippi, Memphis, those kinds of areas were going to happen earlier in the morning. And that on west, it wasn't too bad that those storms came last night. So if I could there's a little window in there that if I can shoot through, I would be after the really bad storms from last night and this morning, and I would be before the really bad storms coming through this afternoon. It got me to thinking about some things related to ministry. Storms are a part of ministry, sometimes literal storms. I remember years ago when I was a youth minister, being in the building with some of the young people when a storm literally took the roof off of our heads or over our heads. But so sometimes you'll have literal storms that you work through, but also we have figurative and spiritual storms. And I'm reminded that sometimes we could avoid those storms with a little better preparation. I just cannot overemphasize how important it is for us as ministers to be prepared. I think sometimes we get in trouble in ministry because we don't do enough preparing. We don't do enough training. We don't do enough learning. I know guys, they can't wait to get out of school and rush right into ministry. And sometimes it's like the story you probably heard of the guy who rushed out to start chopping trees and didn't get his axe sharp enough. And the guy who took time to sharpen his axe ended up cutting more trees. I just can't overemphasize the need to be prepared. And often we get in trouble because we don't preach quality sermons because we didn't do enough preparation. We didn't get all the preparation we could to learn how to exegete a passage and interpret a passage and then prepare a lesson based on that passage, what we call homiletics, and deliver a message that will connect with our audience. Often we don't spend enough time getting to know our audience, getting to know our people, and learning their strengths and weaknesses and habits and likes and struggles. We often don't spend enough time learning about finances. I remember when I was at one of our brotherhood schools overseeing the youth ministry program, often I would ask former students, hey, what is it you wished you had more of? And they would usually say how to prepare taxes and counseling. And the reality is they could use more in those areas, but they were also trained in both of those areas. They had classes, sometimes multiple classes, that talked about how to prepare taxes and finances as a preacher and some good habits. And they even, had psychology classes. The problem was they really didn't dive in. They were just going through the motions. And it wasn't until they got into ministry and realized, man, I really needed to know that stuff. I think about when I got out into ministry I did 4 degrees over the course of my life by God's grace. And there were 8 years between my bachelor's degree and my first master's degree. And I was a much better student when I went back as a master's student, because I'd been in ministry full time. Prior to that, I'd only done part-time ministry. And I realized how important all I was learning in those classes was. So prepare, prepare, prepare. Get all the biblical language study you can. Get all the exegesis prep you can. Get all the training you can in interpreting and preaching and teaching. Get all the training that you can in counseling. Man, get all the counseling that you can get. Prepare, prepare. And I think if we will be well prepared, then we'll avoid a lot of the storms and headaches that come down the road. Another way we can prepare is have mentors in our lives, continue to go to workshops, continue to train. Even I'm going way beyond degrees. Read, listen to things. Driving down the road this morning, I've been listening to a book on culture. I've been, creating a good culture, healthy culture in a business or education environment. I've been listening through 2 Corinthians. I mean, just make study and prep a part of your lives. A lot of sermons die because not because a person didn't know how to do a good delivery, but they died during the preparation process. And you have storms that come, if you will, where people are upset with your preaching because it's not just that you didn't go get enough education in school, it's that you didn't spend enough time preparing for that lesson. And so you were caught off guard by the storm. You just weren't ready. But also, I think we need to know people and we need to know trends. I think one of the things I did in the past is I maybe didn't spend enough time trying to learn trends. So I try to do a lot of reading on culture and generational theory. And of course, it's changing every day. So it's not like you're going to be completely up to date. But I do a decent amount of reading on adolescent development, on generational theory, and on the differences between generations. And I know you can't stereotype people, but at the same time, people that grew up at similar times and had similar experiences often have at least some similar habits. And I think sometimes we get into trouble because we don't know that kind of stuff. We get into trouble with our elders because we never think through how their generation thinks if we're from a different generation. We don't take time to get to know our elders personally. We don't take time to get to know our parents personally. And we get in trouble with young people because we don't understand their culture, because we never ask them, or we never research. We never look at what the research says. There's a lot out there that can help you to understand people and generations and culture, and cultural trends and cultural habits. We just don't take time to learn it. So, Lord willing, God's in charge. And as I move west, I'll be able to stay between the storms and just away from them. I hope more so that in ministry, you can avoid the storms. And I just want to say that the key to that is being prepared. I think another thing I'll just say briefly is be willing to adapt. Like I had to change my route today. I had to change my plans. As we prepare and as we learn, and we learn about people, we learn about our elders and our parents and our teenagers and our culture, we learn the information that can help us to make good decisions, but we're not willing to change sometimes. We get the knowledge, we give the answers on a test, we read the book, but then we don't follow the directions. We're not willing to adapt. We're not willing to change. What is the expression, what is insanity? It's doing the same thing and expecting new results. So I would say be prepared if you want to avoid spiritual storms of life, and then be willing to adapt, listen and learn, and be willing to try something different. I'm not talking about doctrinal differences. I'm talking about procedures and habits. And maybe, just maybe, doing that will help us to avoid our storms. This is Kirk Brothers, and I thank you for joining me for another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. The Lord took care of us, and we got through Memphis, and it is beautiful, beautiful skies.